With the changing season from summer to fall, we typically see a distinct change in activity. But this year it seems like both buyer and seller activity is somewhat tempered relative to what we're used to seeing. Both sales and listing activity has changed just modestly relative to August, and our sales to active listings ratio has actually declined. So what exactly is happening in the market and how is this affecting buyers and sellers? I'm Adina with Adina YVR Vancouver Real Estate Group and Oakland Realty here with your October 2025 market update. Let's jump right into the numbers and take a look at what's happening. In the month of September, we had just under 1,900 home sales registered on the MLS for Metro Vancouver. This is a decrease of 4% relative to August, yet it's up 1% relative to September last year, and it's 20% below the 10-year seasonal average for the month of September. Looking at this by property type, we see that for detached homes, we had 552 sales, and this represents an increase of 7% relative to this time last year. For attached townhomes and duplexes, we had 356 home sales, and this represents a decrease of 6% relative to this time last year. And for condo apartments, we had 954 home sales. This represents a 1.5% increase relative to this time last year. The notable change in September was the pace of new listings coming onto the market. We had just over 6,500 homes newly listed for sale on the MLS in Metro Vancouver. And this represents an increase of 54% relative to August. It's an increase of 6% relative to this time last year, and it's up 20% relative to the 10-year seasonal average for the month of September. Now, when you hear that the pace of new listings increased by 54%, it sounds like a huge change. But what's part of this is also a lot of listings that are being canceled and relisted now in the month of September. When we look at the total inventory levels, we see that we had just over 17,000 homes in total on the MLS available for purchase in Metro Vancouver. This actually represents an increase of just 5% relative to August, and it's up only 14% relative to this time last year. Relative to the 10-year seasonal average for the month of September, we're up 36%. What's also a notable trend is that differential between where we're at now and the 10-year average has continued to decrease. So this month we were 36% above the 10-year average. Last month we were 37% above the 10-year average. Back in July it was 40%. And back in April we were 47% above that 10-year average. So we've seen a consistent downward trend between that differential from the spring up until now. So how is this impacting our sales to active listings ratio? If you recall, this ratio is our leading indicator showing us if we're in buyers or sellers market territory and if prices are on their way down or up. And simply we're looking at the number of sales in a given month divided by the active listings left over at the end of that month. When this ratio is above 20% for a sustained period of time, we're in sellers market territory and prices are on their way up. And when this ratio is below 12% for a sustained period of time, prices are typically on their way down and we're in buyer's market territory. Anything in between is considered balanced market territory. And for most of this year, we've been in balanced market territory, edging closer towards a buyer's market. In the month of September, Metro Vancouver's housing market finally entered into buyer's market territory with a sales to active listings ratio of 11.3%. And this is down from 12.4% in August, and it's been a consistent downward trend from the peak in February-March when we were at 14.9%. So let's take a look at how this is impacting prices. The HPI composite benchmark price for all property types in Metro Vancouver was $1,142,000, and this represents a decrease of 0.7% relative to August, and it represents a decrease of 3.2% relative to September last year. Taking a look at this by property type, we see that the benchmark price for detached homes is currently $1,933,000. And this represents a decrease of almost 1% relative to August, and it's down almost 4.5% relative to September last year. For attached townhomes and duplexes, the HPI composite benchmark price is currently $1,069,800. This represents a decrease of almost 1% relative to August, and a decrease of almost 3% relative to September last year. For apartment condos, the HPI benchmark price is currently $728,800, and this also represents a decrease of almost 1% relative to August, and it's down 4.5% relative to September last year. What we're seeing on our end is that buyers and sellers are still active. We're having a lot of calls and consultations with our clients and prospective clients who are thinking of buying and selling. But for the most part, a lot of people are cautious and they're really wanting to take their time and evaluate their options before jumping into the market. For the most part, there's two types of properties that are selling in this market. One are the unique or rare finds, and that's properties that are in low inventory markets and where there's a lot of pent-up demand for buyers. We're still sometimes seeing multiple offers on those. The other type of property that's selling is properties that are well priced and a great deal. There's still a lot of buyers who are actively looking and they're just waiting for that right opportunity. But most of the properties that are in between and are in neither of those categories are sitting on the market. So what we're seeing is buyers who are very selective and sellers who need to be strategic if they want to make a deal happen. If you're thinking of making a move and want to evaluate your options, you can schedule a consultation by clicking the link down below if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're watching this on Instagram, click the link in my bio. And in the meantime, to stay up to date with what's happening in the market, be sure to follow me on Instagram at adina.yvr and hit subscribe here on YouTube. That's it for now. Wishing you and your family a very happy Thanksgiving and also a very happy Halloween, and I can't wait to see you in November.